Tada.
Servus.
Marhaba.
Hola. Hello.
I'm inspired that there's so many people working to accomplish the same goal of creating a connected future. By having students lead clubs on campus directly supported by Google developers, that's the best way to reach out to students.
It's really inspirational always to hear about members of the community who echo your values and echo your beliefs.
I've been listening more than I've been speaking, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because I'm just getting all these ideas.
Google, it needs to reach a wider audience and be more relatable as a company, and I think Google is one of the brands that is very good at doing that.
All right, howdy. Welcome back to our solution design series. So in our today's workshop, we want to walk you through how to evaluate the design and prototype of your solutions. But first, let's see who are here with us today. So it's me, Evelyn. I'm the DSC lead at UT Dallas. You all must remember Erin. Hi, Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin. I'm the DSC lead from Mount San Antonio College.
And we also have Lee Yun. Hi, Lee Yun.
Hi, everyone. I'm a DSC from Portland State University.
And of course, we have Danny here with us today. Hi, Danny.
Howdy, y'all. Really happy to be here and really excited to get started with this third event. If you happen to miss our first two, check out the description. There might be a video for you to review.
All right, so without further ado, let's get started. And here's our today's goal. So first, we're gonna help you to understand what UX is and how it is different from user interface. Then we will talk about 10 usability heuristics that could help you to evaluate your team's solution design and prototype. Finally, you will get some tips from our DSC leads on how you and your teams can get started on your solution prototype. And here is our agenda. If you have been here with us over the last 2 weeks, you may notice some change in our workshop structure today. Well, just like you are designing a solution to support your local communities, we are designing this series to support you all. And if you recall, one of our top priorities in building the solutions is to always iterating on user feedback to improve the solutions. And one of the things that we did last week is that we put out the feedback form and hear back from a lot of you. So today we made some slight modifications so that we can improve the experience you have with this workshop, and hopefully it works. All right, so just a very quick recap to visualize how this third workshop gonna fall into the whole series, as well as I know that some of you might be not here with us in the last 2 weeks, so this is just a quick thing to catch you up. Some of you might notice this is the design sprint that we introduced last time. So over the last 2 weeks, right, we helped you to understand and define your problem space by narrowing down the scope from one of the 17 events goals, as well as how to start your market or user research. Then in the second workshop last week, we walk you through how you can utilize the output that you got from the very first 2 steps to transform it into an idea, brainstorm it, and examine its impacts with the decision matrix. So in our today's workshop, we're going to focus on the next step, which is prototyping. Prototype is the process where you visualize your ideas and in order to communicate the solution. It's also one of the first steps where you start, examining if it's actually effective to solve the problem. And of course, all of these materials are also available or can be accessed via the Solution Challenge Officer webpage on the resource page. So make sure to check it out. If you missed our 2 previous workshops, there's a link below in this descriptions, so you can check it out as well. All right, so first, let's just start with what is user experience. Feel free to drop your guess right now in the chat, and we will revisit them shortly about what you think user experience is. And just for now, I know like some of you may have already heard or know about the concept of user experience or user interface or usabilities. Those type of words are usually used in an interchangeably context, but it actually not the same things. So let's do some quick, guess here. So this is like the wonderful visualizations created by 8 Lear about like a decade ago. And if I'm not wrong, he is the head of design of Google App right now. So in this scenario, just imagine your solutions or your product is the cereal. And then you can see in the image that all of the cereal box that you got in your cupboard will be your data center. And the container of your cereals will be your server. And just start dropping this comment in the chat what you think would be the user interface for this cereal product and what would be the user experience in here.
"12 seconds later."
All right. So in this scenario, the answer is here. The UI will be anything that the user used to interact with your product. So in this case, it will be the spoon. If your solution is a digital product, it would be a website or a mobile app. If it's a hardware thing, it could be like a button or like a control board that allows your user to interact with the system. So meanwhile, the UX user experience is not a concrete thing, but rather a comprehensive experience that encompasses all visuals, emotional, or even like cognitive process of the user while interacting with the product. It will be something like, does your cereal look nice? Does it taste good? Is it easy to chew or swallow? Or is the texture good when eating with milk? It's even broadened into the context to something like, how it was packaged? Does this box easy to open? It will be like the entire process from the very beginning when you interact with it, like picking it up from the supermarket, until you finish everything and throw away the empty box. So why does it matter? The answer is so simple. It's user. As you can see in the screen, yes, the cup is so nice and cute and beautiful. And I mean, until like the owner actually need to use it. If I was like a kid of 5, 6, I would love this cup, but it's not like the user here is trying to break the product, but the design itself makes it really easy and prone to this kind of like accidental, even like unintentionally. Also, you want to create a solution that is actually used by your user, right? You don't want to waste your time to build such a nice and beautiful and costly breakaway, yet ending up having all of your user picking the other way around, right? You want to learn what your user actually needs and design your solution around them. So when you talk about UX, your impression probably tends to be usually like associated with like visual elements, what feels good, or something like branding. It actually all of them and beyond that. However, with such a broad thing to consider, what should be your priority when you're building your solution then? And here's a hierarchy of what you should consider in your user experience. First, make sure it works. All right, it needs to be helpful. If it don't actually help solve the problem is not a solution, right? And then it has to be accessible and easy to use. Don't create a solution that requires another solution to use it. Then it only comes to what is like aesthetic or feels good better after the first 2 points is achieved. And then finally, it comes to something that some of you might be familiar. It was like brand experience, how to come up with the color, the consistent with the whole thing to try to communicate the value. That is like the last thing to come in user experience. Okay, now we're gonna have Erin to go back on stage with us on the Nielsen 10 usability heuristic. You already know what user experience is, so how to design a good experience. And Jacob Nielsen 10 usability heuristic are the principles that help you to avoid usability flaws in your design. Hi, Erin.
Hi. So before we move on to the next section, we have a question from the chat asking, in the picture, which one was UI versus UX? I'm guessing they were talking about the cup or the cereal.
Okay, let me pull it back a little bit so that everyone can see it. Okay, so in this picture, the UI was the spoon. Oh, I'm so sorry. The text was like too small. So the UI with the spoon, which is what you use to interact with the product. What the UX itself is the whole experience of you with the product. So it's like when you eating like the cereal, how it feels like, how it tastes like. So it was like more of like a comprehensive experience rather than just a concrete thing, just like the spoon itself.
Another question we have from the chat is how to be a pro at UX UI design.
That will be a very tough and broad question. The safe answer is to never stop learning. But one of the things that you need to be aware of when you want to do it UX and UI design is that you have to have your user in mind. You cannot just design or placing by your own personal preference or just because you think it's good, because you are designing for another person. It comes to like a general principle when you do the design thing. It's just not about like what you feels good, what you think is good, but more like what your user prefer, what it works for your users. Do you have any more tips, Erin?
Yeah, so I definitely also focus on the users when designing your product. You should always get feedback from the users from your prototypes or storyboards before actually starting to build the product itself. Because people will give you feedback on how it feels and how they think it feels and what their mindset is at while using your product, which is always something really important because you're creating this product for the users, not yourself.
All right, and we're definitely gonna dive deeper into this 10 heuristic things. It's also one of the kind of like a framework for you to kind of like think ahead when you come to the design step, as well to use it and evaluate if your design or prototype actually work effectively. So let's dive into that. All right, 10 heuristic visibilities. This is like the principles to like how to avoid the common pitfalls in designing. And the first principles is visibilities of the system status, which in the common terms is how well your users are informed by what is going on, right? It could be something like persistent as battery status or a feature being active on. It could be the feedback of one your action or touch gesture on the device if it's successfully processed, right? So what it means that you always have to got a kind of a clear communication with your user about what is going on. You want to do it in an open and timely manner so that the user don't get confused or lost. But it also doesn't mean that you want to bombard them with everything. You want to provide key information that they can either act on it or get assured by the information they are provide. So just think about like when you go into the website and you click something and nothing respond. You don't know if it's loading or is it freezing or something wrong, right? You want to get something in response to know if your action actually work. So that is a thing when you come think about like the visibility of system status. And Erin, can you give us like a very quick example on this?
Yeah, so to elaborate on how we can make communication and feedback clear to the users, let's take a look at an example. So this is Canva, and the flyer for this workshop was designed from here. Once I clicked download, a nice loading bar popped up showing where in the process the system was downloading my flyer. This loading bar is communicating to me, the user, how long until the flyer is downloaded onto my computer, and providing me feedback on what it's suggesting next once it's downloaded. Evelyn, you mentioned to build trust through reliability, and the loading bars that we see here clearly do so because Canva is actively and openly laying out the downloading process for me. Are there any other ways we can build trust between the system and end users?
Yes, of course. So we talk about a clear and open communications, and this leads us to our second principle, which is matching between the system and the real world. This means that your solution or your product should communicate in kind of like a same language with your target user, with kind of like language that your user familiar with. If anything from how it could be anything from like how you label things or how you explain or navigate or the content on your products. For example, so if I say something like dihydrogen oxide, like as one of like vital substance in the world, you might hate me so much for bringing chemistry here and provoking your fear. But if I say something like water, it will be nothing, right? You understand. You know it. What is it? It's so common. It's nothing special. But using like big words or jargons make it so confusing and it sounds something really strange and you probably don't really actually understand what it is. So it's worth noting that your design should follow like the real world convention and how the user actually communicate in the real life context because like people tend to assume how things should work following their past experience both in the real world and digitally. So you want to make sure that your solution or your product fit to those kind of like conventions. So if they are using casual, if your target user usually use some kind of like professionals language, use them. If your target user are more like public and they use casual language, try to use those like common terms. Don't scare them with jargons and big words. And also like try to ensure that kind of like user actually understanding the meanings of all your label and the terminology you use on your, for example, website or mobile app or any kind of like hardware because you want them to actually understand and get the feedback, right? You give them the feedback, but if they cannot understand it, then it doesn't mean anything.
Right. So I think one example we can all look at, and I think we all have, is the recycle bin on our desktop. Have you ever noticed that when it's filled with all the files, every time you've right-clicked and deleted them, that the actual icon on your desktop shows that it's filled? Then every time you decide to empty it from your temporary storage, the icon shows up as an empty and clean recycle bin. This is a perfect example of matching between the system and the real world. Just like real life, it's natural to throw out the trash every time it gets filled. The system's icon is matching real life virtually, where the files are like documents that you would recycle, keeping it in the bin until you actually throw the contents out of the bin, out of your house. These different icons match my own expectations as a user, which is something you should always do when designing your UI. The user also has control and freedom over what they throw out and need to get back, which is another feature of the recycle bin. But Evelyn, why is user control and freedom important?
All right. So before we dive into that topics, I just want to say more like elaborate on this point of view. So you can see that in here we use like the recycle bin like an illusions of how things work on the computer, right? It's very similar when you throw away things in real life. But it's not always the case where you try to mimic the thing in real life 100%, because when you try to, like imitate it like 100%, you will also copy the kind of like the physical limitations of it. So just try to focus on how it works, not just like the whole things, how it works in the real life, but just like the whole process of how you get rid of things and just that thing. Don't pick up all of the kind of like limitations of it. Just pick up the strength point so that people can get some reference of how thing works in the products. All right, so now let's talk about user control and freedom. So no matter how tech savvy you are or how well you imitate things in the real world, we still make mistake when using the technologies. So even when I'm typing right now, I'm still making typo, my mistake, have to back it, or I can like misclick something on a website that I visit daily. And with that said, like unwanted actions or mistake happen all the time. And what your user needs is a way to back out after making this mistake. Just imagine if you, I don't know, never like can undo a thing you did, like accidentally delete your 4-page essay on the due date just before submitting it. It's gonna be a disaster. So just always give them an emergency access, like undo, cancel, close, or like redo. This is gonna encourage users, especially news one, to kind of like explore the products, your solution without afraid of getting stuck on an unwanted page or contents. It gives them the sense of control and freedom so that they feel like, okay, I know like I can use this product and I got some kind of like space to control it. I'm not gonna be get stuck at somewhere that I want and feel frustrated, get lost, get confused, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so similar to how the recycle bin can retrieve most things that you throw out from your computer storage in case you need it again, Gmail's undo button allows you to catch an email before you actually send it. Here in this email, it looks like I accidentally sent an email before thinking that I had everything good to go. But I suddenly remembered that there was an important note I needed to add. So I quickly go to the undo button on the bottom left. I have control as a user to undo and redo sending my email, where the undo button provides me an emergency exit out of sending that email. It's also clear that this undoes the sendings, as the email draft gets sent back when I click undo.
All right. So that is about the user control and freedom. Okay. Always give them the emergency exits. And so we talk about how things should match the real world and how users should have a sense of control over using the product and your solutions. So one way to further encourage this is through impose consistency and standards. That is the fourth principles. So that your user don't need to wonder how these components or symbol works. Are they the same or are they different? So there is two types of consistency: is internal consistency and external consistency. So internal consistency is within your product, things that perform the same or similar functions should be consistent in visual and in how it actions. You don't want to keep changing your, let's say, navigation bar on a website every time the user click a new link, or you don't want to keep changing colors, the shape, and style throughout the whole web page randomly. That's kind of thing. You want to stay consistent internally, and it gives your users some kind of cues of how visual elements get attached to some specific meanings. At the same time, external consistency refers to some consistency between your solution, your product, with something different, something other similar products. Let's think about most of the e-commerce site, right? When you think about an e-commerce site, you will have some certain level of like how e-commerce website should work. You should be able to pick a product, you add it to cart, you go to a checkout webpage, and that is the convention that the industry applies. And you would want to follow these standards so your user can kind of like anticipate what is coming next, so that they don't feel like, oh my god, I never used it before. Should be like this, should be like that, right? It reduces the cognitive load. And it doesn't mean that you should never break the standards, but when you do something new, it takes time and effort for your user to learn it over again. So if it's not actually worth it to break the thing, so if you not actually find a much more efficient patterns to impose in there, try to stick with the standard, try to stick with the external consistency. And one other thing I want to highlight here is also the intentional inconsistency. So we say that in internal consistency, right, you want similar components and similar things that function the same way should be look similar. So it helps them get the cues of how things work. But how about two different things? You want things different, you want to create distinction between two things that function differently so that the user can kind of like distinguish them from each other and don't make mistakes. And let's review with Erin how without intentional inconsistency, what could happen.
Yeah, so one example might be infamous to some of you, but Google's previous version of Mail, Calendar, and the Drive icons at the top had a consistent visual style, but have recently been updated on the bottom to use the same colors across several applications of their suite. However, Google's recent icon change isn't a very good example of keeping a product consistent and adhering to standards, as they focus more on unifying their visual language rather than keeping their products easy to find and use. Many have expressed how much harder it is to differentiate between the new Google icons in their phones due to the small size of the icons. From far away, the user only sees little rainbow blobs. They all have all of the colors of the Google colors, which just right off the bat makes it harder to tell them apart at a glance. Always follow good icon usability practices to test your application icons before launching. You don't want users making unintentional errors, even if they are low cost, that cause them time, effort to find these icons, and you know how much you could do with all that time.
That is a perfect example of how you should not let the consistency thing overshadow everything else, right? So if you remember like the hierarchy that we mentioned at the very beginning of this workshop, so it comes from like utility first. So it needs to be useful and it needs to be usable so that people can actually use them. And then it's kind of like pleasing. And then lastly, it comes to branding. There's like too much branding there and it should not overshadow the usability of the product. So keep that in mind. All right, so we talk about how we should help user to back out when they encounter an unwanted scenario in principle 3. But a good design actually should prevent this error from the very first place. It could be a confirmation request or a warning message so that your user can be aware of the potential consequence of the actions so that they can back out immediately if it was a mistake. So one of the things for the prevention tips is to prevent high-cost error first and then low-cost errors. Try to provide some helpful constraint and good defaults to avoid slips and try to remove the memory burden. Support kind of like undos or warn your users.
Yeah, so error prevention is a really important design feature when designing your product. We've all heard that one person hit the reply all button when sending an email, or I've been the person who's forgotten to attach a file to our email. The first can be considered a high-cost error, causing multiple, maybe even hundreds of people time to open up that reply all email. And the latter is the low-cost error, costing you time to send an apology email with the file actually attached in your next email. The pop-up feature implemented by Gmail is recent, but it's a good example of error prevention. With the system reminding you that you need to attach that important file, it saves you time as well as prevents worries from clogging up your brain.
This reminds me a lot of time that I sent an email with an attachment say, hey, take a look at this document, take a look at this, even from my professor. And then I sent it and I was like, oh no, I forgot to add the attachment there. I had to do a follow-up email like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't attach in the last email. And this helped me a lot. Like every time like I forgot to do a thing, this pops up like, okay, that's a very good pops up thing. Thank you for reminding me. All right. So the 6 principles is derived from our memory retrieval ability. So, our memory is not really perfect. I write the email. I really believe that I attached the document there, but it's not. So think about when you have to take an exam. You would feel so much easier when it is the multiple choice question rather than the short answers. The reason being that it is quicker and easier for you to retrieve your knowledge using the given answers in the multiple choice as the clues for you to kind of like double check with what in your mind, rather than you have to like look for the answer by yourself with the short answer questions. So in the multiple choice, you actually recognize the answers, while in the short answer thing, you have to recall it by yourself. Recognition is much easier and less effort than recall. And you want to bring this kind of like principle into like your design. You want to help your user to reduce their cognitive load significantly when using your products. Don't force them to memorize things. It's not pleasing, it's not convenient at all. Let your user recognize the information in the interface rather than recalling it. So to do that, you can just like kind of like pops up some, for example, when you log in using one of the emails, usually you can see like a confirmation message, like you log in using an email. And sometimes if, for example, if I got like an organization emails and a school's email and a personal email, those kind of things kind of like help me to troubleshoot, oh, if I did like just log in the wrong email or whatsoever, because I cannot recall like what I just did. I do believe that I did the right thing. But those kind of messages help me to kind of like confirm if it's actually the one, and it's much easier. And Erin, can you show us like one more examples on it to make it easier to understand?
Yeah, sure. So, like Evelyn said, designing your product to be more recognition friendly rather than recall friendly is the reason why we all find multiple choice questions to be easier than short answers. So, let's take a phone number. In a phone number, each group of numbers is chunked into the area code, prefix, and line number so that there's a universal pattern that people can memorize easily. Instead of having the users focus on remembering a jumbled up number, users remember by group numbers instead. It's also why acronyms are easier to remember for a test rather than disorganized information. And so, to the right, in a version history, you might find on the Google Docs or slides, the system groups your changes by times and dates. By recalling all the times that the system recognizes you've spent working on a Docker slide, you remember what exactly you edited in that time frame better.
Yes, I love this version control thing. Like there were so many times like I actually changed something in like the essay I type on Google Docs, and I kind of like want to revisit like what I write earlier and just go back to it. It was kind of disappointed when I use like the Google Forms and I change something, and it show like you can revisit the change, but it actually don't have this log, and I cannot recall what I actually typed. So this one would be much easier to review what I changed and what I want to like redo that information things. So we talk about up to this point, we talk about how we can, like help user to prevent the errors, how we can help them to kind of like expect what is going on and kind of like ease into the product. This kind of step is super helpful, especially like if your user are someone who are new and never used your solution or product before. But when you have a solution that has been going on for a while, probably like about like 2 months, 3 months, and it's going on, and it's a lot of users who are being like kind of familiar with your system. One of the things that you want to consider would be the seventh principle: flexibility and efficiency of use. So there's just so many things that is simple, but it could be like like single step, and then just like try to walk you through in the baby steps so that you can understand what is going on. That is very good for new users. But when it comes to like experienced user who had already familiar with the system, it's kind of boring and kind of like time consuming. You just want to make it quick. I don't want to go through the whole like tutorial thing. I know how it works, right? So one of the things you need to consider is flexibility and efficiency of use, which means that your design should provide some kind of shortcut to the user experience, so with the experienced users, and let them to kind of like personalize or customize something so that they can tailor the frequent action they usually act on your product to like make it like quicker and easier for them to do it. So here's an example.
Yeah, so like Evelyn mentioned, accelerators like keyboard shortcuts are UI features that speed up an interaction or process. This might seem intuitive to implement in your product, but there are lots of ways you might constrain the user from getting what they want from your product. In this example, when entering the amount of a certain drug into a system, the system constrains the user from entering in different units other than milligrams. You never want to do this in your product, as it can cause frustration and cause the user to tire from using your product, the more that they have to follow the constraints that you've set on the user.
Yeah, it could be good if you try to kind of like standardize it how you want to collect the information, but you also don't want to kind of like limit themselves from all the choice they have. So you can see that a lot of like units of measurements that only use in US that is not really familiar with like the rest of the world. So it kind of like give them a lot of trouble to go through like the whole Google thing of how to convert the whole measurements, and that is so consuming and so desperate sometimes. So we talk about like how you want to, like keep your product to be flexible and efficient in use. And this is like the thing that people usually like mistake user experience with user interface. So let's just remember that user interface is a part of the user experience at the whole spectrum. And when it comes to aesthetic and design, you want to, like only contain relevant and necessary information, and you want to minimize the irrelevant information. So if you recall in one of the previous like principle, we talk about like how you always want to communicate with your users, but you also don't want to bombard them with all the information in the world. Just the keys one is because like you may recognize a lot of, let's say, some website. They got a lot of huge graphics that look so beautiful, that's so attractive, but it's not like exactly what the user needs. And instead of making the website better, it actually distracts the user from what they are trying to accomplish in the website. So let's think about when you come to the website and got so many like beautiful graphic advertisement around, and you cannot like focus on the content you are trying to read. Those kind of thing is really dangerous because it's not actually like reduce the effectiveness and efficiency that the user is trying to achieve. So keep the essential content and visual design in UI. Don't let unnecessary information distract your users. Try to minimize as much as possible and prioritize the content and feature to support the primary goals, right? So we have a very like limited and selective attentions. You don't want to bombard them with everything. Prioritize it and put focus and like highlight to emphasize what they are trying to achieve with that specific kind of like milestone in the process.
So we've all been to a website that makes our head hurt when we look at it. We usually associate these websites as old websites that we'd rather not navigate around and use, and it even kind of hurts to look at. Clogging your web pages of your product with information and unnecessary colors is something you should avoid at all costs when presenting your product to end users. Yeah, it definitely makes your product seem outdated and frustrating to use.
Yeah, I remember this come through a lot of this website, especially in the 2000s, where like everyone tried to explore and experiment with all kind of colors and fonts and then pictures and try to put everything on the web page. It was horrible.
But a very relevant example that we all look at pretty often is Google's home search page. It really only has the search bar and access to your profile settings and doesn't bombard you with information, which makes it minimal and easy to use, as well as easy on the eyes. I mean, after all, you're using the search engine to get information about everything else. One thing I'd like to point out from a design perspective is that Google makes really efficient use of white space in their designs quite often, from their product web pages to inside these slides when we use Google icons or designs. Whitespace is a really underrated tool you can use to make your product more minimalistic, and it only takes strategic spacing of the objects on your product. I would even consider whitespace to be one of the most important topics in this presentation.
Yes, I really love like this minimalistic like design because your only attention, the thing only captures your attention is a search box, and that's like the whole function of this page for the moment. You only want to focus on your primary goals, not like get distracted by anything else. So we talk about like, like we want to prevent users, give them some kind of warning message so that they don't encounter some kind of like unwanted actions. But let's be honest here, sometimes even with just the warning message, we still misclick something because like it's just like, okay, I'm just click okay. And sometimes I just okay the wrong things. And that is the reason why it comes to the NICE principle that you have to help your user recognize, diagnose, and actually recover from the errors. So at least your error message should be precisely indicate the problem and suggest, if possible, a constructive solution. Try to describe the errors in the user language. Don't use jargons. Not everyone understands all the computer science terms. So don't scare them with the big words. Again, use the user language. Do something very common. If something with the server and they cannot do anything with that, explain for them that they can go back in as I try to reload, go back later, so like that. Or if possible, help them to offer some kind of like solution so that they can recover from those errors. So if you are a CS student, right? Let's imagine you are coding a project with 1,000 lines of code and then you got a bug, but your terminal just not let you know what is going on. You don't know what the errors is. You have to go through the whole like 10,000 lines of code you have just written, and you're just clueless of what is going on. Everything feels right for you. You don't understand what you did wrong. Then that would be horrible. So always try to communicate with them. Don't let them get lost or confused in all kinds of error. Give them some solution or direction to kind of like get like rest assure them that everything is okay and it's not your fault. It is the design thing that is going on. That is the technical thing that is have nothing wrong with you. If they kind of like make some mistake, give them the emergency exit so they can actually go back to like the previous stage. Because I have learned about like so many people when they got stuck to an app, they're just like, okay, this app is not working. I want to quit it. I'll go to another one. And you don't want to do that, right? You want people to keep using your product. So this is very important to remember.
Yeah, so before we get into the next example, we have a question from the chat. So Giovanni asks, what % of our time should we spend on designing the UX and UI of our apps before launch? So this actually really depends on how complex your app is. A basic UI UX design of the app should accomplish the minimum viable product that it can achieve, and the minimum viable product is what a product, the smallest amount of features that a product will have before it gets released as quickly as possible, because you can always make updates to your app. Evelyn, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, especially like if you was here with us like last week when we talked about design sprint. So one of the things that is most time consuming and costly when you make errors is only happen when you actually build things. So I would say that spend a lot of your times before you actually build your product. Especially I saw like a very similar question from Suraj, apply on the back end. So try to, like understand the user, do some user interviews, get some feedback surveys from them, do the sketch thing just on paper, or do some on like use some software to kind of do prototype on how your ideas may plays out. It's super cheap. It's like the cheapest way for you to actually examine how your solution works in the real life context. Ask some of the user may come through, try out the prototype, and then see what is going on with that. Is a design heavy kind of problems, troubleshoot it with these kind of like frameworks, try to get some feedback from the user who have just test on your prototype, and then go back, modify the design until you find that, okay, this is good enough. This is like it's okay to move on. Then that is the time you actually work on the UI with coding, with backend. Don't worry about the code until you actually got a solid idea that you believe and you found a way to prove that it's work first. That would be like my answer. It's not like % of your time, but like how do you feel, how you can keep iterating on that. So I think that I got the question from Ali on like what kind of like prototype that we should use. We will dive deeper into this in the second half of this workshop. But some of the things that can come into my mind is like Figma, which I think got a very like easy like learning curve for you who are like beginners and never used a prototype before. Or if you are more like a person who familiar with design tools, you can try out like Adobe HD or Sketch. Those are the two that is really popular in the design communities. So Figma, Adobe HD, they are all good. It's totally up to you which kind of thing that you preference. I personally prefer like Figma because it's easy to use. It got both like web version and then the desktop app so that I can just move between the two. I can share it, that's it. But I found that Adobe HD is super cool. It offers like very much like the same like function things. So it's totally up to you.
Yeah, and one last thing to add is that you might look at some apps like Instagram or Uber that have really complex UI UX designs, and that might take like over hundreds of hours. But keep in mind, you're trying to build a minimum viable product here, not Instagram or Uber. And those apps also took a lot of updates and iterations for it to become what it is now. So I'd say build enough until you get it working and simple, and then you could build from there.
Yeah, that absolutely true. Like, don't try to aim for the perfect in the first one. You want to keep iterating on that and get some kind of plan of how you want to test this out. That'll be like a really good idea of how you want to visualize the future of your products, because like it's gonna be very different when you only have like 3 or 5 person test out your products until you got like about like let's say like 100 person use it or like 3,000 person use it. It's gonna be different. All right, let's go back to like our example on the ninth principle, Erin.
Yeah, so thinking back to the ninth principle, how we can help users recognize and diagnose errors. So I think we've all been here where we're trying to solve some kind of technical problem and it just gives us this error message on the right. Of course, CS students can relate real well when debugging code, but just like how we all get extremely frustrated when we can't find or understand the source of all of our errors, you want to avoid providing just a 404 not found error when the user accesses something that they're not supposed to in your product. Instead, you should send an error that's specific as possible when end users encounter something that they're not supposed to. On the left, Google provides a specific error message to the user to provide more than 8 characters to their passwords, giving the users a solution to solve that given error. Follow this example, and if you can't find possible sources of error at that time, encourage the user to reach out to your team so that you could diagnose the error for future end users.
Yeah, just let them like have a way to like contact you just in case there's nothing they can do, or like tell them to go back at like a certain times amount to try again, so that they don't just like like wait infinitely in there getting desperate, and they can't do anything technically. All right. So we talk about like a lot and about like how you can help the users, how you can prevent the errors from them, how you can improve the experiment. But one of the things with your product is that you need to care about your team as well. So your users are part, but if you have when it comes to like this 10 principle is help and documentations, you are actually building a thing that kind of like build a shared knowledge between you and your team to be on the same page of what you are doing, and then share it with your users so that they can have like a kind of like reference to, so that if they are like new person but they kind of have some kind of like knowledge in the fields and they don't want to go through the whole silly dummy tutorials, they can just look it up the help and documents so that they can just like easily find a way to figuring things out. And in this kind of like documentation, you want to kind of provide some helps in the context if needed and comprise like concrete step in the help documentations. So Erin, let's walk through some kind of example with this.
Yeah, so as you can see here on the example, we have Flutter. And one universal example shared by every API, language, tool, or even physical products is that they all have manuals that come with it to help the users understand and use their product. For example, new cars have manuals to help users navigate a dashboard. New gaming consoles have their manuals to help users around their controls. And even tools like Flutter have their own code documentation written to help new developers build their first Flutter project. You never want to skip this step in designing your product. Whether it be a large book manual or a simple pop-up when users first use your product online, always put documentation that users can dig into for you to instruct them on how to use your product.
All right, so that should conclude our 10 principles. So before we dive into like the next part on how to get started on prototyping, let's welcome back Lee Yoon and Danny as well on the stage, where we will try to answer all of the questions left in the chat. Hi Danny, hi Lee Yoon, welcome back.
Yeah.
Hi.
Thanks for having us. I just got to say, that was really informative. I know I was seeing a lot of students thanking y'all in the chat and asking some questions. So just going to catch up on some. Thanks, Michael, for the shout out. All credit goes to these amazing students that did a great job. So it looks like we do have a question here. So what is a wireframe frame? Yeah. What is wireframes in an Android app and how to develop wireframes? One of y'all want to take that?
Erin, you want to take that?
Sure. So I'm thinking, so an Android wireframe is to build like a little sketch of your Android app before you release it on the Google Play Store or the iOS. And it helps you explain a couple of ideas that you have for your design in your apps to customers or to your end users. And after building a wireframe, you're able to have users interact with it, show them how it works, and then after you use that wireframe, you're able to get a consensus on what ideas are being conveyed through your app.
Yeah, I just want to add on that. It's like when it comes to wireframing or prototyping, it is not usually like consider the technology part yet. It's just purely focusing on the design thing so that you can try to, like how you organize the elements, what kind of hierarchy you want to care about, how you gonna lay out the whole kind of like navigation between the page. Let's say you are building a website, how you're gonna move from one page to another, how you gonna try to kind of like display this kind of like button, how you want it to, act on it. If you don't need to click on it or you need to drag on it or whatsoever like that. So in the prototype and wireframing phase, don't focus too much on what kind of technologies or backend or Android or iOS you want to do, right? Focusing on the design and the user needs only so that you can try to figure out how to come up with the best way to organize the elements and display it. At the same time, it doesn't mean that, let's say, Android or iOS doesn't mean anything in the design phase. If you recall that we talk about like the external consistency. So in Android and iOS, you're gonna recognize if you're familiar with like UI thing, there will be like specific like UI kits so that when you try to display certain elements, it's gonna be consistent through like all the iOS app or all the Android apps. So for Android, I recall it got the material.ios. That is where you got the resource for all the UI elements so that you can utilize it in your prototype. Because like when it's come to like doing the prototype things, right? You don't want to draw all kind of button again. You don't want to redo all the navigation bar. All of this thing gonna be put into kind of like a kit for you to utilize it, just like you reuse your code. So this is a kind of thing that's available for you, so you can just drag and drop it. You don't need to like draw it again or try to like sketch it again. I see another like question about like what is the purpose of wireframe. So let's say it's the way to visualize your ideas and test out how it works. Because as I mentioned that once you start building on it, right? Even though like you probably like a very good like UI designer, sorry, like an UI engineer, you so good in like coding your website, it still take you time and effort to actually build it. But with the wireframe, it's a very cheap and easy way to kind of communicate that idea without actually coding it. You don't want to spend like a whole week, given that you only have like 2 or 3 months to work on your projects, and you don't want to spend like 1 week to just like coding a website that is not gonna like actually work at the end, and you have to change the whole things. So wireframe is the quickest way for you to visualize your ideas and then bring it to for other people to test on it without actually building it. It saves you a lot of effort, time, and even money.
Right, and a quick note that I'd like to add for wireframing. Wireframing is used both in creating your own website as well as like magazines. If you ever seen like a fancy table of contents layout in a magazine, that was definitely thought up of by wireframing. And this is similar to building a website. Before you build it, you always want to wireframe your web page or app before you actually start coding it, because this gives you a sense of direction and sense of how you want your page to look like before you start coding it. Like if you start coding it before building a wireframe, you're not going to know where does this image go or where does this text go, and you'll kind of be lost without one. So I highly like it should be a requirement to build a wireframe before you even start developing a website or even developing like a page layout.
Yeah, I think of it like a draft for you to visualize things and make things concrete before you actually build it. Because like I have encountered a lot of like situation where you start coding things and you come to like dead end just because you don't think about it ahead. You cannot like visualize everything in your head at the same time. Your cognitive loads have like limited, and you don't want to like go through the whole thing in your head and then figure out by the end, oh, I didn't think about situation. It actually going around, or I never like encountered this thing. So wireframe is a thing to put it concrete on the paper so that you can troubleshoot the errors by yourself and give it to others to kind of give you the feedback on that without like wasting too much time. And I think like there's another thing, another question about like creating a wireframe, which website or software for app. So it's like, I think it's like which software to use, right?
Yeah. So you could use either a website or a software to create a wireframe. My personal favorites are always using Canva. You could even build a wireframe on Canva. Another thing, though it's not free, is Adobe InDesign is really helpful when creating wireframes because it gives you like a grid layout and you could just place your images or text boxes there. But other free choices would be Figma and Adobe XD for also creating other wireframes. They're all prototyping tools that can help you.
Yeah, so one thing I want to note here is that when it comes to wireframing, prototyping, I'm sorry, we're throwing a lot of terminologies here for you, but let's try to focus on this. So for the wireframing, you are trying to draw like kind of like the layout and the flow of how it works. So when you think about the website, you want to know like what kind of components go to the top, which one go to the left, how you want to organize the panels, how you want to organize the navigation bar, those kind of things are layouts. And then you want to see like how from one page you move to another page. Okay, you want to kind of like visualize those kind of like process by arrows, by flowchart. I mean, like for me, I don't even use like software for like wireframing. I just sketch on paper. It's like the quickest way and it's free. But unless like you have something to visualize like how things gonna work, and then after you got some kind of like flows and basic organizations, you don't need to care about anything like visuals here. I'm super bad at the color and typography, so I'm just focusing on like how you organize your informations, how you put buttons around, how where you put it, what kind of like size or ratio that you want to cares about at first. Those are like the highlight, the thing that you want to emphasize in your wireframe, and get a good flow of how things move around, so that in the final goals of you with the wireframe is that if you are dropped into the screen, you got some kind of like visibility of the system status so that you know where you are, so that you see some kind of like consistent between all the screen that you sketch out and you visualize. And you want to kind of sometimes kind of like where you can make errors and how to prevent it. Those kind of things are what you care about in your wireframe. And then once you got all those screens flash out your mind, make it clear, improve it on the paper, on the software, whatever you use, start prototyping. Prototyping is where you add the interactive element into that. So that, for example, if you see on like, if you are familiar with Figma or Adobe XD, you can see that when you click the button on your screen, it can actually move to another web page. So it gives the real life experience of how you can interact with the product, with the screen that you sketch those are the prototyping things. So try to kind of like emphasize on that. And in the prototyping thing, that is where you start caring about like how it visual look like. Is it enough contrast for the people to kind of like seeing it, even if they got some kind of like color blindness, those kind of things. All right. I think that's all the question we have for now. So let's move on with Lee Yun and Erin.
Thank you, Evelyn. Yeah. So as we know, we have talked about different things in the first two workshops, right? So here I'm going to talk about the prototype phase. So in this phase, we should remember that prototype is not the goal, but it's a tool for you, which means before prototyping your idea, you can think about the following questions. So first question will be, what are your objectives and expectations of this prototype? So that means before starting the prototype, you have to fully understand your objectives and expectations. You should not prototype your idea without having a clear goal, because you literally don't know what you are doing, and that will decrease your productivity, and ultimately you will waste your time. The second question will be, who's your audience? So it's important for you to understand what kind of user you target, right? Because and here's another and here's the specific question you want to know, which is how will that audience react to, which means you can imagine that you design a product, or you have a prototype already, but the audience is not interested in the prototype you have designed, because the prototype is totally irrelevant to the audience. So it's good to understand your audience beforehand, and you will not waste your time and effort. The next question will be, how much effort and time can you afford? Well, it's a practical question before you start prototyping your idea. To be able to have a good product or a prototype, you should think about how much effort and time you have to put into the prototype phase. Well, so in general, you don't take a large amount of time to only work on the prototype phase, right? Because it's a phase to visualize your idea, right? But it's not the goal, right? It's a tool to help you visualize your idea and your concept. And the last question will be, do you have anything in hand that does the same thing? So you may think about, do I have the same thing before prototyping my idea? If so, you might be able to reuse the stuff you already have. You don't need to prototype the idea again, and then you will have more time to be able to work on the actual system or app. And we will mention a tip in the next slide. So here's a tip for you all. So the essential thing in prototyping is a storyboard. So it's a way to be able to map the things you want to test and clarify the pieces you want to prototype. And you might be asking why we need a storyboard to prototype your idea, right? From the previous phase, and there are three good reasons for you all. First, don't need to be elaborate. which means team members can visualize their ideas by putting their thoughts to the storyboard. So individuals can quickly understand what the others are thinking. Instead of giving a lot of explanation to the to the team members, they can catch up different ideas, different thoughts by just looking at the storyboard. The second reason will be you might forget something, right? So storyboard is a good way to record what your thought is and what you have been doing so far, so you don't worry to miss some important things during the prototype phase. So, for example, in this figure, we can see there are different things on the storyboard, and when we have them, we are gonna know what the next task is. And the last reason will be estimating time and effort. So when team members map up map out their ideas to the storyboard, you and your team members can easily estimate how much time you and your team members can complete the whole task. Um, right, and I'm going to talk about the other tip in the next slide. So here's the other tip, which is making an organism. So what's important to make an organism is that users can immediately understand the UI or the app that you have designed without getting any trouble to use it. In other words, people are going to interact with human rather than just a machine when they use the UI or app you designed. And here's some ideas for making an organism. First idea will be icons plus text. And the second idea will be combine and define their behaviors. The third idea will be combined into a navbar. And the last idea will be molecules are individuals predefined, so reusable. So maybe Aaron, you can give some examples of those ideas.
Yeah, so let's take a look at an example of prototyping a navbar, like Leon said, in a mobile app. You usually start with atoms, or what are known as the icons or text that you could see in the picture, the first level. Then you combine them into a molecule, which means you would line them up into what you would think is the layout of your navbar first. And at this stage, you would also define and prototype the behaviors of this molecule. For example, do you want this icon to be toggled, or do you want it to be selected on the navbar? And so if you put all of these molecules together in one line, let's say at the bottom of your app, you get an organism, which is the navbar itself. As the molecules are individually predefined, changing each of the icons or text won't interfere with the other molecules. So theoretically, the navbar is actually reusable for any future prototype you might want to do. So using this design ecosystem is a way of setting up a modular and can greatly increase the efficiency of prototyping. Once an interaction was defined at the icon and text level, it can be reused for any visual style by replacing the visual assets. If you precisely follow the design system, thinking and creating all the prototype components systematically, from the low fidelity prototypes to high fidelity, this would be as simple as a replacement of all the visual assets in your next prototype.
Yeah, and also I just want to like add on this is that when you have the symbol and the text itself together, so this is kind of like a principle called redundancies. So it means that it's not only communicate in one way, but it allows you to understand the whole context in multiple way. So for example, if there's some, just say some hypothetically problem that your symbol just not render or the image is not working. So the text could be like a way for you to fall back on that the user still can understand what is going on and what should be on that positions. Or just some way like if in some case that you the user probably use another like website or applications that uses very similar symbols but for different functions, they very likely gonna assume that they work the same based on the experience that you say that we talk about like how they rely on their past experience in like the matching system with the real world context because like that is their real world things. They think that it works like that and they bring that assumption to your products. So giving some kind of like label and text make it easier to communicate it. And as like Erin and Lee Yun have mentioned, that we want to communicate it easier for us to like we are social animals. We want to communicate with human rather than like just yelling at the machine itself. So this gives them a kind of the thing as like easier to communicate, give them some kind of like redundancy so that they can feel like okay, they get something to fall back even when like it's not necessary. And yeah, I think like if you have any more questions, just drop in the chat. And I think it's a time to bring back Danny here. Danny, where are you?
Hey, y'all, can you hear me okay?
Yes, very loud and clearly.
Awesome. Yeah, so this has all been some really important information. One of the things that we will make available to y'all, right, other than this video living on YouTube forever, is we'll share some additional resources after in the description. So make sure to like, share this video with your friends. But as many of y'all are probably wondering, hey, where's that swag from the last week's activity? So with that, let's go ahead and move on to our next slide. Let me actually share my screen instead so we can go ahead and announce the winner. So we're going to do a name of wheels for all of those who did participate. Let's give it just a second for me to get it up on screen. All right. Gonna go ahead and get it added. Oh, there it goes. Can you all see it from your end as well?
Yep.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and get this spin going. As you'll notice today, I did add a respin in there. So if we happen to land on the respin, we'll just have to give it another one. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this going. Thank you to everyone who participated this week, and congratulations has not. Well done. Looks like you might be running away with our swag this week and last week, if I do remember correctly. So thank you all who participated. Really appreciate it. Encourage your friends to join this activity as well. Really want to give y'all some cool Google swag as well as reward y'all for your participations. So please do join us this week for this new activity. It's going to be a lot of fun.
All right, so for this week, this is the week 3 challenge that we got for you all. Is gonna be Danny. What is the swag for this week?
Oh, the swag for this week. Yeah, so we're going to do it a little differently. This time, what I'm going to do is give out a t-shirt and some pop sockets, as well as stickers, all branded with the Developer Student Club brand. So stay tuned, and maybe you'll win all of these fantastic items. All you have to do is, scan this QR code, make sure to complete everything which is being asked of you. Oh, by the way, pay attention to our shared photos folder above. We are asking you to share a screenshot. Hopefully from this, we can, build a really awesome collage of all of the things y'all have done and showcase it on our next event. So with that, please, scan this QR code right now, get started, and I look forward to rewarding you with some amazing swag next week.
So yeah, just to like clarify on this, so all you need to do is that have like a brainstorming sessions virtually. Do not do in person right now. It's not safe. Just do it virtually with everyone. Have a screenshot. It could be like a sketching sessions or brainstorming sessions. Just give a virtual screenshot there, upload your image, and then we may feature you on the next week, and then we're gonna randomize and draw a draft again so that we decide which team gonna win like all the t-shirts and stickers. Why not? It's easy. Just host the sessions, join us, and have fun. All right. So and this video is gonna stay here forever on YouTube, so you can always go back anytime you need. So don't worry about that. We're gonna move to our group activities right now, but you can always go back to this video and scan this QR code and upload your team image and win the T-shirt. Don't forget to do that. All right, let's move to the group activities. So for this week group activities, we're gonna very much the same drill. We're gonna let you try to evaluate some design, and together as a group, you all gonna try to using the 10 principle that we talk about to kind of like look into some certain design, see how well they are following those kind of like frameworks, or is there any kind of flaws in the design that you can actually improve using these principles. And I think Danny, can you go back and explain like how we can go to a breakout room and how to get the number out of it?
Yes, absolutely. So I am about to drop a link in the YouTube chat. This is going to be the link to our breakout meeting rooms. So give it just a second for that to appear on y'all's screen. From there, go ahead and click join. I will be switching over to that in just a minute to admit you. So go ahead, click the link that I dropped in the chat now. You should see it, and stand by for admission. We're going to close off here, and then we'll see you at the breakout sessions.
Yes, and also like there's some kind of like group activity materials that the link and the QR code is on the screen. Make sure to scan it and then go access to it. And when you go into your breakout room, you're gonna have a assigned number on your breakout room. Find that corresponding number in the drive, just like the team folder number like 2, team 3. Just join that one and work on that with your teams. All right. See you on the other side.
Thank you all so much for joining us in this live stream for the Solution Challenge event number 3. We're going to be closing out the live stream as we have moved over to our breakout sessions. Please join us for this group activity. We would love to have you. Pro tip, remember, you can always rewind this video to gain access to this QR code or meet if necessary. But thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you on the other side.